One of the great writers of history was Dante Alighieri. A poet, mystic, and mythologist, Dante was also a spiritual thinker and psychologist, one of history's great minds. In his work, he tried to discern the underlying moral order of the universe. His greatest work, or magnum opus, was the Divine Comedy. An epic poem, it fit in the tradition of the ancients, the poets Homer and Virgil. In the comedy, Dante tries to explain the human experience. Inspired by Catholic theology, he presents a vision of man as divine, made in God's image, and possessing inherent dignity. He presents a thesis, explaining man's purpose on earth, and how to prepare for the afterlife. Dante was an idealist, meaning like Christ and Plato, those who believed in the spirit and that the soul survived death. Dante believed in the idea of original sin, the idea that man was born with a fallen nature through the descent of Adam, and that thus needed to be purged through asceticism. Holistic, Dante integrates all the myths of his time. A lover of antiquity, he'll reconcile the tales of the Greeks and Romans with the later traditions of the Jews and Christians. A believer in revelation, Dante wrote the comedy piecemeal, intuition by intuition. He wrote in Florentine, usually considered the most beautiful language. In his poem, he took advantage of the uniqueness of the Italian language. With its vast numbers of words that end in vowels, he created a rhyming scheme that can't be recreated in other languages. His poem is divided into stanzas, the equivalent of paragraphs in poetry, consisting of 3 lines each. In these stanzas, the first and third lines would rhyme, and the second line would rhyme with the first and third of the next stanza. Dante was able to maintain this structure for over 14,000 lines. Dante will be extremely elusive, referring not only to Christ, his largest influence, but to figures like Aristotle, Caesar, and Orpheus. The history of Florence, which we've explored before on the channel, is also deeply intertwined with the life of Dante and the plot of the comedy. This will be another long-form video, so it will be broken into sections, and similar to the others, you can use timestamps to navigate it. We'll explore Dante's life and philosophy, including the Vita Nuova, follow his journey through the 3 parts of the comedy, the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, and finally conclude exploring his legacy for religion, mythology, and art. Dante was born in Florence in 1265, during the late medieval period, but before the Renaissance. He's one of the great figures produced by the city, alongside Machiavelli and Da Vinci. In this way, Florence will be similar to Athens, which produced its own major thinkers, like Plato and Socrates. The 2 cities also birthed great political leaders, Lorenzo the Magnificent and Pericles, whose leadership allowed the rise of these intellectual figures. As we mentioned, the politics of Florence will have a major influence on Dante. During his time, Italy was divided between 2 factions, the Guelphs and Ghibellines. Dating back to the time of Charlemagne, Italy had been a part of the Holy Roman Empire. As time progressed, however, the difficulty of keeping Italy and Germany politically united increased, resulting in a devolution of power to the Italian city-states. Though Frederick Barbarossa attempted to reunite the empire, the Germans gradually lost their hold over Italy. During this time, those in favor of retaining the emperor were called Ghibellines, while those who fought for the independence of Italy were called Guelphs. This struggle encompassed a larger conflict between the Pope and Holy Roman Emperor. The emperor in Germany was the medieval successor to the Roman emperor, the monarch chosen by God to rule over the secular sphere. Meanwhile, the Bishop of Rome, who had evolved into the papacy, claimed to be Christ's representative on earth and the highest power in the spiritual sphere. The issue was if the Pope's spiritual authority gave him jurisdiction over the emperor as well, or if their 2 spheres, secular and spiritual, should remain separate and co-equal. This conflict folded into the struggle of the Guelphs and Ghibellines. The Pope, as an Italian, favored independence for Italy, and became a crucial figure of the Guelph movement. Eventually, after years of conflict, the Ghibellines were defeated, and the city-states and principalities of Italy became factually independent. Soon after their victory, though, the Guelphs divided into two new factions. The issue that arose was over the authority of the Pope. Though he had been a key ally in gaining independence, once the city-states were free, the Pope tried to assert his factual rule over Italy. The so-called Black Guelphs were sycophants of the Pope and accepted his secular power, while their opponents, the White Guelphs, not only supported independence, but freedom from papal tyranny as well. Dante himself was a White Guelph, and his politics will lead to his persecution and exile from Florence. He'll be sentenced to death in absentia for a litany of false crimes, and due to this will never be able to return home from exile. Dante will write a work called On Monarchy, which will explain his politics. He'll present a medieval concept of the idea of separation between church and state. Despite being an Italian patriot, he'll still acknowledge the significance of the emperor, viewing him as God's worldly representative and the successor to Caesar. Dante will present a vision of a universal monarchy, one where all people are unified in a single empire. He believed this type of government would create the best environment to allow for human flourishing. Dante wanted Florence to have self-government, while still accepting a position as a part of a universal monarchy. He was wary of the church, which he viewed as corrupt. He felt the Pope was interfering in a domain he had no place in, and felt the emperor was a necessary counterbalance to restrain him. Though Dante loved Florence, he would be rejected by the city, just as Socrates was from Athens. Dante would eventually settle in Ravenna, which today houses his tomb. Though Florence still claims him as his own, the city retains the dishonor of its historic rejection of him. Dante will become an autodidact, educating himself by reading the classics. His largest influences were the New Testament teachings of Christ, the Roman poet Virgil, and the Greek philosopher Aristotle. A mystic led by his inner guide, once inspired, Dante will author an epic poem to succeed Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Dante will work as a diplomat, and after traveling to Venice for an embassy, became ill and died prematurely in 1321, at the age of 56. In the Middle Ages, concepts of race and identity functioned differently than they do today. Only as the Renaissance progressed into the early modern period did early versions of nationalism, like Spanish and French, begin to coalesce. In Dante's period, the age of the city-states, there didn't exist a concept of Italianness. Regional identities took preference, though they all recognized their shared Italic heritage. As he was from Florence, Dante was a Tuscan, meaning he was descended from the Etruscans of antiquity, the cultured northern rivals of the Romans. Meanwhile, the Lombards, another people of Italy, were the descendants of a Germanic people who seized the region around Milan before embracing its culture. Despite their differences, bonds of kinship united Italy. All viewed themselves as part of an Italic culture, a heritage not only including the Romans, but their ancient neighbors as well. The Italians developed a legendary history. Deriving from the poet Virgil, they saw themselves as the descendants of Aeneas, one of the heroes of the Trojan War. Surviving Troy's destruction by the Greeks, Virgil taught that Aeneas went on an epic journey across the Mediterranean before migrating to Italy. This tradition integrated with that of the Christians, their Trojan ancestors descending from the Anatolians, and before them the line of Japheth, one of the sons of Noah in the Old Testament. Over time, Latin became the common language, or lingua franca, of Italy, until it united its peoples. Later it divided into branches, one being the Florentine of Dante, generally considered the most beautiful language, and the forerunner of modern Italian. By focusing on his Italic heritage, Dante is able to unite the pagan and Christian traditions into a single narrative. This means he doesn't have to discard all the pre-Christian heroes of antiquity. For example, Dante portrays Caesar, though a pagan, as God's choice to lead a universal empire. Throughout the comedy, Dante is proud to dignify his ancestors. He places Italic heroes, like Caesar and Aeneas, in noble spheres, while condemning others, like the Greeks, Achilles and Alexander. Dante is one of the great poets of history, ranking alongside the ancient Greek Homer and the Roman Virgil. Homer was the author of the Iliad, the tale of the Greek conquest of Troy in the Bronze Age. The poem begins in Sparta with its king Menelaus. Similar to the tale of Aphrodite, who was given to the smith god Hephaestus to avoid war between the gods, Helen was so beautiful she was given to Menelaus to avoid conflict or war over her. Visiting Sparta was the prince of Troy, Paris. At this time, Troy was the era's most powerful city, controlling the trade that passed through the Hellespont and becoming increasingly tyrannical and imperious to the Greeks. In Sparta, Paris meets Helen, who's seduced by the beauty and high birth of the prince. He then abducts Helen, taking her back to Troy with him. In some versions of the myth, Helen goes willingly, though in others it's a forcible abduction. In either account, it's the final straw, the last insult made by the Trojans against the Greeks, that results in the declaration of war. At the time, Greece was divided into small kingdoms. The most influential was Mycenae, where Menelaus' brother Agamemnon reigned, an ambitious and capable leader. Over the years, he had signed pacts with the other Greek states, gradually turning into the de facto king of the Greeks. Seeing an opportunity to unite the Greeks further and solidify his power, Agamemnon created a coalition to oppose Troy. Among the Greeks who come to Troy is the strong Ajax, the ruler of Salamis off the coast of Attica. Achilles, the king of Phthia and Thessaly, comes, as well as Odysseus, the king of the island of Ithaca off the coast of western Greece. Achilles was famously an invincible warrior, undefeated on the battlefield. Finally, when the Greeks arrive at Troy, they defeat the initial Trojan army that comes out to greet them, before beginning their siege of the city. As the siege progresses, the Greeks taunt the Trojans, goading them to send their best warriors outside the walls to fight in bouts of single combat. Menelaus challenges Paris to combat, but the prince proves a cowardly and incapable warrior. Achilles then challenges Hector, Paris' older brother and the greatest hero of the Trojans. The two have an extraordinary duel, but it results in Achilles killing Hector. Despite this, the strong walls of Troy continue to foil the invasion. After a long stalemate, the shrewd Odysseus comes up with a plan. The Greeks will get on their ships and sail away just beyond the horizon, creating the appearance they've abandoned the siege. Meanwhile, they leave a wooden horse as a gift, knowing the Trojans were great lovers of horses, and it being common in that age for defeated enemies to leave a gift or token. Celebrating their victory, the Trojans take the horse into the city, but hidden in it are the strongest warriors of the Greeks. They sneak out in the night and open the city's gates as the Greek army sails back ashore. The Greeks sack Troy, ending the city's power forever, though in the battle Paris shoots Achilles' heel with an arrow that's been poisoned, causing him to finally be slain. Some Trojans escape the destruction of their city, and one of the heroes who helps in its evacuation is Aeneas, who's referred to by name by Homer. The father of Hector and Paris, King Priam, is defeated, and the victorious Greeks bring Helen back to Sparta, concluding the famous work. Homer was also the author of the Odyssey, the tale of Odysseus' return home. Sailing back to Ithaca where he was king, he's delayed by the gods, facing the one-eyed monster called the Cyclops and the witch Circe. He descends into the underworld seeking aid from the prophet Tiresias for insight on how to return home. In Ithaca, Odysseus' wife is assailed by suitors who believe Odysseus is dead and wish to marry her and become king. Finally, Odysseus returns home, slaying the suitors and concluding the poem. During the age of Caesar and Augustus, the Romans established themselves as an empire. Yet despite their rise, they always felt inferior to the Greeks. The Greeks had founded the academic disciplines, and the Romans were slow to match the achievements of Alexander. However, the Romans would create a more stable, enduring empire that would last for centuries. Wanting to culturally match the Greeks, the Augustan Virgil wrote a poem in Latin called the Aeneid. Virgil built off his predecessor's writing, putting the Aeneid in the same great tradition as Homer. He built off the character of Aeneas, turning him into an Italic hero. Like Odysseus, after Troy's destruction, Aeneas goes on a long journey through the Mediterranean, seeking a new home. Descending into the underworld to meet with his father, Aeneas goes through the self-transformation this experience symbolizes. His travels take him to Carthage, where he has an affair with its queen Dido, before he departs for Italy. Spurned, Dido takes her own life, their tragic tale foreshadowing the future wars between Rome and Carthage. As we said, Dante was self-educated, having read all the works of classical literature on his own. However, to Dante, his greatest teacher was Virgil. In Dante's mind, Virgil was the archetype of reason, the culmination of the learning of the ancient world. In homage to Virgil, Dante would write his own epic, but go further than him or Homer, creating a vision of the cosmos which would integrate the pagan and Christian. As an artist, events and figures possess a greater significance to Dante. He'll develop parasocial relationships with two beloved figures, who will feature in his comedy. His mentor Virgil, though he lived over a millennium before, will be his guide through hell and purgatory. Meanwhile, Beatrice Portinari, a beloved figure from his own life, will be his guide through heaven. Dante met Beatrice when he was around 8 years old, and their meeting left a lifelong impact on him. He would meet her again a decade later, when she would greet him warmly, producing a profound impression on the poet. Dante's relationship with Beatrice is an example of limerence. We've discussed this idea before on the channel. Limerence is a form of infatuation, where the beloved is turned into an archetype. They become the ideal partner. In Dante's case, an example of the divine feminine. To the limerent, union with the object of their desire represents completion and perfection. Limerence is a powerful and intoxicating experience, often leading the limerent through cycles of desire, hope, devotion, and despair. Beatrice would die prematurely at age 25, never getting married, and for Dante dying as a symbol of piety and virtue. She would die in 1290, a decade before the starting date of the comedy. Dante would write a book dedicated to Beatrice called the Vita Nuova, which elevated her into an artistic idea, a model of the ideal lover. Dante presents a system of mythology in the Divine Comedy. He starts with the traditions of the Greeks and Romans, then adds those of the Jews and Christians. Trying to reconcile everything, he uses the tales of Heracles and Achilles, as much as those of Noah and Abraham. As a medieval Christian, Dante was a creationist, believing in the literal narrative of the Bible. In it, man had a divine nature, having been literally created in the image of God in the Old Testament. In Genesis, the father of the human race, Adam, causes the fall of man by eating from the tree of knowledge. This introduces original sin to humanity, all human beings inheriting the faults of their ancient ancestor, creating a sense of intrinsic guilt. This was why Catholicism emphasized the importance of penance and religion. Humanity multiplied after the death of Adam, populating the Near East. Man created the first cities, with their ruler Nimrod constructing the Tower of Babel to rival God. This, along with the city of Enoch, won God's wrath and caused him to bring the flood. The purpose of the deluge or flood was to purify the earth and start again. God would choose a select few of righteous individuals who would be saved and make up the new generation of humanity. We discussed this story previously, explaining Noah and the ark he built to survive the flood. After the flood ended and the world was restored, Noah's sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham, became the fathers of the Indo-Europeans, Semites, and Africans, each traveling to a different continent. In a prior video, we explored the flood myth in detail, showing the strange ubiquity of it across history. James Frazer showed most cultures have an account of the flood, and have an antediluvian ancestor who became the father of later generations. The Bible then tells the story of the patriarchs. Abraham, a descendant of Shem, makes a covenant or special relationship with God. His descendants become the Hebrews, God's chosen people. Eventually they invade and conquer Israel, and rise to prominence under two great kings, David and Solomon. Later, Christ is born in the 1st century, in the biblical narrative descending from the line of David. By this time, Judea was not independent, but a province of the Roman Empire. Christ taught a radical new form of morality that inverted the traditional ideas of strength and power. He presented a new model of the Jewish religion, focused on the quest for immortality and the principle of love. Crucified, in the Gospels he returns from the dead in the resurrection, the world's most important mythological event. The return is a powerful symbol, showing it's possible for man to conquer death. The apostles then spread Christ's teachings, which eventually came to dominate Europe and the Mediterranean. The Christians foresaw a spectacular future, a day of judgment when the righteous were rewarded, Christ returned, and heaven and earth came together. The Italians call Dante the supreme poet, placing him alongside Homer and Virgil. Yet philosophically, Dante goes beyond them. Though he lived before Da Vinci and Machiavelli, his thought presaged the Renaissance. A humanist, he possessed great insight into suffering and human psychology. Inspired by Catholic theology, Dante believed in a kind of natural law. Though humans couldn't comprehend it, the existence of an all-loving God meant the world was ultimately ordered by the principle of justice. Applying reason to reality, in the comedy, Dante attempts to comprehend impartial justice, and thus the true moral order of the universe. The central theory of Dante, which answers this question, is the idea of contrapasso. The word means to suffer the opposite, that every action has an opposing moral consequence. Another of Dante's ideas is that like attracts like, that those of a similar nature or constitution are attracted together in the afterlife. We even see the operation of this principle imperfectly in the human world, like prisons concentrating different types of criminal. Being with those you are like is often its own reward or punishment, the violent with the violent, the wrathful with the wrathful, and the wise with the wise. Dante is most associated with the 7 deadly sins, which make up a key part of his philosophy. Due to the sin of Adam, man is born with inherent traits that separate him from his divine nature. These are the famous vices of lust, greed, pride, sloth, envy, gluttony, and wrath. Opposing these are the 7 heavenly virtues, the traits of chastity, charity, humility, diligence, kindness, temperance, and patience. Not only a spiritual thinker, Dante was also a psychologist. He felt the virtues led to happiness or states of harmony, while the vices led to states of suffering or pain. If we look at the world today, we can see how even now the 7 deadly sins can still be a part of one's personal or social downfall. Recalling the line of Jacob in the Old Testament, that he dreamed a ladder stretching from heaven to earth, the angels ascending and descending it, Dante believed that by overcoming the vices, the higher one could ascend on a spiritual hierarchy. Dante's work portrays archetypes, experiences that are universal to the human condition. A teaching of Plato, archetypes are things that just by being born, we all experience. Things like sex and death, masculine and feminine, justice and resurrection. Plato believed the physical world emanated out of the spiritual world. Though different from Christianity, he believed in reincarnation. One of his famous accounts is the story of a Greek hero who was killed in battle and placed on a funeral pyre. Before he was cremated, however, he revived and recounted a story to his companions of the afterlife. In his account, he described seeing souls ascending and descending, some being judged for past deeds, and others in line to be born. For modern people, this recalls the near-death experience, showing its ubiquity across history. Ultimately, Plato would have a huge impact on Christianity, influencing their view of the afterlife. Plato taught that there was a spirit world, where forms or ideas, original copies of all objects in reality, existed in a perfect form. These included the ideas of wisdom, justice, and beauty. While Plato viewed this impersonally, later Christians would say these ideas were thoughts that existed in the mind of God. Finally, Platonic philosophy had a strong relationship with mythology. Plato taught there was a river of forgetfulness, the Lethe, that existed in the afterlife. Prior to being reincarnated, a soul would drink from this river, allowing them to enter its next life with a virgin memory. One of the tropes of the philosopher Plato was to write his books in two layers. His works contained an explicit or obvious layer called exoteric, and a second hidden meaning called esoteric. This appeared most famously in his book The Republic, which on its surface was a work on politics, but more discreetly was about establishing justice in the soul. The Divine Comedy is like this, comprehensible in both literal and figurative ways. On the surface, it can be viewed as the tale of a soul's journey through the afterlife, while it can also be read as an allegory for a path meant to be followed in this life. Dante belonged to the Catholic tradition, and a major pillar of it was mysticism. Mysticism was a life path that perfected the soul and brought it to enlightenment, itself inspired by mythology. As they developed, the mystic passed through the stages of awakening, purgation, illumination, the dark night of the soul, and divinization. We find that the narrative of Dante's poem mimics this path. Finding himself directionless and wandering through life, the mystic has an awakening, similar to Dante when lost in the dark wood. The mystic then descends into a personal hell, overcoming his shortcomings and confronting the parts of himself that are repulsive or horrifying. The soul then gradually ascends through the process of the contemplative life, experiencing illumination until they reach deification or enlightenment. Finally, mystics are believers in intuition, and we see this in Dante. Written piecemeal, insight by insight, Dante made himself a vehicle for the divine to craft the comedy. The Divine Comedy is broken into three parts: the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. The name comedy doesn't refer to it eliciting laughter, but comes from an older meaning of the word, meaning a work with a happy ending. Though Dante will pass through the Inferno, his tale will end with a vision of beatitude, perfection, and immortality. The Divine Comedy is broken into stanzas, a poem's equivalent to paragraphs. Each stanza has 3 lines. Of these, the first and third lines rhyme. The second line then rhymes with the first and third of the next stanza, continuing throughout the poem. Italian words usually end in vowels, which creates a large list of words that can rhyme. When reading Dante in translation, the rhymes can't be communicated properly. Thus, some English translations abandon it to get other aspects of his language correct. Like the Trinity, the comedy has 3 parts. Each part has 33 sections or cantos, except the Paradiso, which is 1 more, adding up to a total of 100. Dante's personality shines through the Divine Comedy. Though he is creating a work of world literature, he isn't afraid to express his true feelings, thoughts, and prejudices. He'll meet popes and personal rivals in hell, Caesar in Elysium, and Brutus and Cassius in the maws of Satan. Dante will show his authority as a poet to be the final judge of history. Finally, reading the comedy, you can get to know quite a lot about Dante personally. You can discern his sense of humor, his system of ethics, and how he viewed human psychology. Dante begins the Divine Comedy in the year 1300. It begins halfway through life's journey, when the poet is age 35. This comes from the age of man described in the Bible, which is 70. The poem begins with Dante in a dark wood of error, symbolizing the human condition. It portrays our ignorance, confusion, and directionlessness, born into a world we don't understand. Dante will provide purpose and form for the human experience, creating an epic journey from nihilism to immortality. In the forest, Dante is assailed by 3 predators: a she-wolf, lion, and leopard. These animals represent the three categories of sin he'll navigate later: incontinence, violence, and deceit. Above him, heavenly powers have turned their attention to Dante, seeing his merit and wanting to support him like the gods in the Iliad. In heaven, Beatrice sees Dante's state of confusion and goes to Elysium, the pagan heaven, to meet with Virgil. She tasks Virgil, who represents reason and secular philosophy, to come to Dante's aid. Then, once sufficiently educated, she'll be able to lead Dante with her to paradise. Virgil finds his fellow poet lost in the wood, and Dante is amazed to see the figure who he viewed as a lifelong teacher and mentor. Virgil praises Dante as his student and explains how he's been sent by Beatrice. As a spirit, he'll be Dante's guide on his journey, taking him through hell and purgatory before the poet can be united with Beatrice. Dante and Virgil travel through the wood and reach the gates of hell. Like in Greek mythology, it's an actual physical location in the world, a cavern that descends into the underworld. The iconic line, "Abandon hope, you who enter here," is written above the door. This term not only represents the suffering of hell, but its permanency, that once admitted, a soul can never leave. Often overlooked is the second line written on the gate, the simple phrase, "Justice made me." Earlier, we explained Dante's effort to morally comprehend reality. We explained he developed the idea of contrapasso, to suffer the opposite, to understand justice in an impartial universe. In hell, the soul creates their own punishment through their actions or nature. The phrase alludes to how hell is freely chosen by the soul, and that in order for free will to exist, justice creates hell. When Dante and Virgil arrive at the gates of hell, they see that its great iron door has been cast open, lying before them on the ground. In Christianity, after Christ died on the cross, he descended into the underworld. Over the 3 days before the resurrection, he launched a military raid into hell, conquering it through the power of love. Christ's mere presence was repellent and violent to the souls there. His entry is so powerful it causes an earthquake, the consequences of which Dante and Virgil will see throughout the Inferno. Called the Harrowing of Hell, Christ will redeem the souls unjustly confined there, before returning to earth in the resurrection. As they see the door, Virgil tells Dante about his own experience during the harrowing. He describes Christ as a mighty one he sees descending like a conqueror through the underworld. Entering the gates, Dante and Virgil see anti-hell. Outside, the angels who stayed neutral during Satan's rebellion, waiting to see the winning side, are punished. Alongside them are the humans who also never chose a side in life, always serving their own interests. Since they never followed a cause or banner, here they're forced to chase flags or banners in the afterlife. They're compelled to do this by wasps who bite them, which causes their blood and pus to cover the ground. This ooze is then consumed by worms and maggots, which the bannerless are forced to tread on. The first example of a Dantean punishment, anti-hell shows the complexity of the poet's morality. Contrapasso, or justice, creates an impartial punishment for everyone. As we said, in Greek mythology, the entrance to the underworld is an actual physical location. Descending, a visitor eventually encounters and finds their way blocked by a subterranean river. This is the Acheron, the boundary between Earth and the otherworld. Here the living are stopped. The ferryman, Charon, sails to the shore, only giving passage to spirits. Many myths include this moment, and heroes other than Dante always pass Charon with a special reason or power. Heracles forced Charon to transport him, while Orpheus, seeking Eurydice in hell, played a song of despair over his wife's death, which enchanted Charon. Meanwhile, Aeneas passed by showing Charon a golden bough, a gift from Persephone, the wife of Hades and queen of the underworld in Greek mythology. It's a branch of a tree from her garden that's made out of pure gold. With this token from the queen of the underworld, Aeneas has her sanction to pass. When Charon sees Dante and Virgil, he begins screaming at them. saying they have no place in the underworld. Virgil explains they're on a divine mission sent by heaven, and if Charon refuses, then the powers of heaven will force him to transport them. Begrudgingly, Charon gives the poets passage, bringing them into the underworld. As Dante and Virgil depart from Charon, they have a vision of hell. Dante's hell is a great chasm descending into the earth. It's divided into levels or tiers that take the form of concentric rings. These are the 9 circles of Dante's Inferno, each one dedicated to a class of sinner. Those in the highest levels have committed the least offense, guilty of a lack of self-control. Still, they valued material things over the transcendental, and thus chose hell in the afterlife. Meanwhile, the lowest circles are dedicated to those who committed the worst offenses, alienating themselves from God and love. Corresponding with the animals Dante saw in the wilderness, his circles are divided into 3 layers: incontinence, violence, and betrayal. Dante's hell descends until it reaches the center of the earth, the furthest one can get from God, and the source of all gravity and guilt. Dante and Virgil enter hell's first circle, limbo. Unlike the rest of hell, it's a pleasant place, and not a place of punishment. It takes the form of peaceful green fields, inspired by the Elysium of Greek mythology. Limbo includes the great thinkers and leaders of antiquity. Figures later Renaissance humanists will recognize for their contributions to humanity. Though they're not punished in the underworld, they fit the epigraph on the gates of hell. Born before Christ, they're without the hope of theology and cannot ascend to a higher plane. Here are the Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Plato. The first, the father of natural philosophy, which today we call science, and the second, a transcendental thinker, the first in Western literature to teach the existence of the soul. Here can be found Cicero, the Roman who tried to maintain the Republic, as well as Socrates, who lost his life when he was forced to drink the poison hemlock. Dante includes the ancient Brutus here, the Roman who overthrew Tarquin, alongside the Muslim philosophers of his time, Avicenna and Averroes. Dante places Orpheus and Eurydice here, whose tale we explored in another video. He places the Trojans, Hector and Aeneas here, and proud of his heritage, Julius Caesar as well. Finally, limbo houses the 2 great poets, Homer and Virgil. United with them, they welcome Dante among their ranks as their successor and heir. Leaving limbo, Dante and Virgil descend into hell proper. There, they're brought before the judge of the dead. They approach the figure Minos, the ancient king of Crete, who tortured Theseus in the labyrinth. The archetype of a sinner, in hell Minos has assumed a monstrous form. A connoisseur of sin, when a new soul approaches, he wraps his demonic tail around them. The number of times his tail encircles them identifies which circle of hell the soul is sentenced to. They then descend, either voluntarily or not, to their circle. Like Charon, when Minos sees the poets, he enters a rage and tells them to return to where they came. Yet Virgil taunts him, reminding him of how he died in life, boiled alive by his enemies, to avenge the people he killed. Again, Virgil declares the divine sanction behind their mission, and that the judge has no authority to stop them. Dante and Virgil enter the second circle, which is devoted to punishing the lustful. The circle takes the form of a huge cavern, the silence of it broken by the shrieks of souls buffeted around in a terrifying wind. This is the circle of the lustful, those punished for the obsession with sex they had in life. Turned into shades without bodies, their own obsession is their punishment, as they're unable to satiate their lust as spirits. Dante looks at the sight of the circle with horror, watching the souls endlessly buffeted around. Here he sees Paris and Helen of Troy, their lust having been the origin of the Trojan War. He sees Dido, who killed herself following the affair she had with Aeneas. He sees Cleopatra, who used sex to control Mark Antony. He sees Achilles, who in legend was seduced by the daughter of King Priam. Dante meets a couple from Italy, the Lombards Paul and Francesca, who had an affair in life. Francesca had been married to Paul's brother John, but filled with lust, broke her marriage vows. Discovered by her husband, he killed both of them, and their souls were sent here to the Inferno. Hearing this, Dante is moved by the tragedy of their tale, thinking of his own devotion to Beatrice. Leaving the lustful behind, Dante and Virgil proceed down the rugged slopes leading to the third circle. Punished here are the gluttons, those who couldn't control their appetites on earth. The gluttons are confined to a place of slush and mud. Dismal clouds, unique to this circle, unleash a torrent of dirty rain and snow throughout it, giving its ground the appearance of a garbage heap. In Dante's philosophy, in death the soul is united with whatever it was most devoted to in life, whatever it believes is the highest good. See nothing higher than the gorging of the body. The gluttons create their own torture in the afterlife. In Catholic theology, St. Augustine said the human heart was never satisfied until it rested in God. As though buffeted by a great wind, the soul is drawn to one pleasure or compulsion after the other, always seeking, but never finding, ultimate satisfaction. His insight was true fulfillment could never be derived from anything in the world, but only through devotion to the highest principle. In this circle, Dante meets Ciacco, whose name means the hog, a famous countryman of Florence that Dante knew personally. Famous for his gluttony, in death he's been sent to the third circle. On seeing Dante, Ciacco praises food as the highest pleasure, then prophesies about Dante's future in Florence. Like Tiresias in the Odyssey, the denizens of Dante's hell are able to predict the future. Ciacco says the Black Guelphs will take over Florence, that they'll accuse Dante of treason and drive him into exile, and they'll sentence him to death in absentia, all predictions that will come true. Meanwhile, the souls here are punished by Cerberus, the three-headed dog of Greek mythology. He slavers over them, tearing at and devouring the gluttons, his teeth a mirror of their own ravenous natures. As Dante and Virgil depart the gluttons, they encounter Plutus, one of the mad denizens of the underworld. Taking the form of a disfigured man, he wanders back and forth insane, babbling incoherently and threatening the poets. As he does, Virgil confronts him, invokes divine power, and drives him babbling away. The fourth circle contains the hoarders and wasters, those who fail to achieve temperance in life. The greedy tried to accumulate wealth, while the wasters squandered it. Their punishment, like Sisyphus, is to roll great boulders back and forth against each other, warring with those of the opposite nature. As they do this, they yell back at each other, "Why do you hoard, and why do you waste?" The philosophy of Aristotle, which had a large influence on Christianity, is visible here in the comedy. First, Dante's layers of hell, incontinence, violence, and deceit, derive from Aristotle. Second, the philosopher taught that virtue was a golden median or mean, a balance between extremes. Each virtue lied between deficiencies and excesses of a trait. For example, courage, lying between cowardice and recklessness. Here, the hoarders and wasters failed to achieve the balance of temperance. As Dante and Virgil enter the fifth circle, they encounter Hell's second subterranean river. The Styx, which takes the form of a fetid swamp, contains two types of sinner. It contains the wrathful, those unable to contain their anger, and the sullen or joyless. While the sullen might surprise modern readers, in Catholic theology, despair was a form of self-indulgence, a consequence of man rejecting the light of illumination. The wrathful assault and attack each other, surfacing in the water as they do so. In Dantean fashion, their reward in the afterlife is being imprisoned with those of a similar nature. Meanwhile, the sullen gurgle, sunk to the bottom of the river. Their murmuring creates a satire of joyful hymns, while they also find themselves injured by the attacks of the wrathful above them. On the shore, Dante and Virgil climb to the top of an infernal tower. Here, Virgil raises a torch that casts a dim light across the river. Seeing it, the ferryman of the Styx races toward the poets, hoping to encounter more souls to torment. Phlegias is the shade of an ancient Greek king, who had been killed and sent to hell by Zeus for destroying a temple of Apollo. Phlegias is enraged to see Dante, refusing to transport a living man across the river. Virgil reminds him of the tale of his death and commands him to transport them. As Dante crosses with Virgil, he looks at the sullen, pitying them. However, in one of the most surprising scenes for modern readers, Virgil admonishes him. He tells Dante that justice is impartial, and these souls have created their own punishment. He explains that by helping these souls, Dante is actually being unjust. As they cross the Styx, Dante sees a contemporary, Philip Argenti of Florence, flailing amidst the wrathful. In life, he had been a black Guelph, an enemy of Dante's, who fabricated false charges against him. Argenti surges forward, grasping onto the boat, and in response, Dante begins berating and ridiculing him. As Argenti climbs on the boat, Dante begins kicking and beating him, sending him flailing back into the water, where the wrathful turn on him and start to tear his body to pieces. Meanwhile, Virgil praises Dante, telling him his action was just. Crossing the Styx, Dante and Virgil see the flaming red towers of Dis, the city of hell. Through it are the lower circles, the domains of the violent and deceitful. The ferryman deposits the poets on the shore in sight of Dis. Looking up at the city, Dante and Virgil are surprised to see infernal figures racing down the gates towards them. Rebellious angels who fought in the war against God. They're hostile and malevolent. Unlike all their prior rivals, Virgil is noticeably anxious, afraid Dante will be killed. He entreats heaven for assistance. As the infernal angels reach the poets, a messenger from heaven appears over the Styx, creating a loud din that echoes through the circle. Flying toward the poets, the angel's very presence repels sinners and the malevolent angels. With a fixed gaze that appears occupied with other matters, the angel then flies toward the gates of Dis, raising his hand and breaking open the gate. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he returns to where he came. Dante and Virgil are astounded by this, but now understand the divine authority that supports them in their quest. After regaining their bearings, they enter the city of Dis, filled with mosques made out of burning iron, and structures made out of scorching red bricks. Dante looks up to see flying devils on the city's battlements. He sees souls being dragged through the streets by demons, as screams and cries echo through the city. Exiting Dis, the poets descend to the sixth circle. They walk through a countryside that resembles a cemetery. As the poets proceed, they see graves and mausoleums, and looking closely, they see flames bursting out of them. The sphere of heretics, souls here are punished by being confined to burning tombs. Each tomb has its lid beside it, while those interred cry out in anguish. The souls here are those who denied the existence of the spirit, who believe the soul dies with the body. Denying their own immortality, they consign themselves to tombs in the afterlife. Consistent with Dante's philosophy, they create their own punishment, exemplified by the lids lying to the sides of the tombs. Among the souls here are the followers of Epicurus, a Greek philosopher who taught there was no higher purpose in life than pleasure. Dante sees a pope here, Anastasius, crying out from one of the tombs. The poets reach the edge of the countryside, and looking down, see a steep cliff that's been created by Christ's raid into hell. As they peer down, an overwhelming stench of putrefaction drives them away. Virgil explains the tears of hell to Dante, explaining that malice, or the desire to injure others, is a trait most loathed by God. However, when malice manifests through betrayal, it denies the principle of love, and thus is the most punished by God. Escaping the foul odor, the poets find a path down the cliff. Descending into the darkness of the seventh circle, the poets turn to see the Minotaur. A creature from Greek mythology, the Minotaur was a slave to King Minos. After forcing the inventor Daedalus to construct a labyrinth for him, the king imprisoned the Minotaur in it. The tyrant would then demand sets of 14 captives, 7 men and 7 women, to be locked in the labyrinth, there to be killed and devoured by the Minotaur. Taking the form of half bull and half man, the poets see the Minotaur and evade him. Looking down at him from safety, they mock and jeer at the creature. The poets transit the circle till a red glow begins to illuminate the darkness. The poets descend to see the Phlegethon, the river of boiling blood. Approaching it, Virgil explains this is the circle of those who commit homicide. The poets look in the river to see the forms of tyrants, murderers, and conquerors. Those who committed bloodshed are punished proportionate to the number of lives they stole in life. They boil in the same blood they shed in their lifetimes, the level they're submerged in representing the number of innocents they slayed. Those who attempt to leave the river and climb to the shore are assailed by centaurs, half man and half horse. The centaur were famous archers. As the souls reach the shore, the centaurs shoot them with arrows until they're forced to flee back into the river, carrying their new wounds with them. The poets see Attila the Hun, famous for ravaging Italy and Gaul and destroying the Roman Empire, submerged in the river up to his eyebrows. Virgil negotiates with Charon, the leader of the centaurs. In Greek mythology, Charon was noble and had the nature of a philosopher. Virgil explains the poets must cross the river, and Charon assigns Nessus, one of the centaurs, to carry them on his back across the shallowest place on the river. In Greek mythology, Nessus sexually assaulted the wife of Heracles, then abducted her and carried her away across the river. As the poets sit on the centaur's back, there is a suspense over whether the centaur will betray them. Nessus deposits them on the opposite shore, then seeing a murderer trying to escape the river, begins shooting him with arrows. The poets then proceed into a shadowy forest, filled with gnarled trees. Dante is puzzled and asks Virgil where the sinners are, meanwhile accidentally breaking a branch of one of the trees. Virgil replies they are in the forest of suicides. Virgil explains that in accord with justice, those who destroy their own bodies in life are deprived of them in the afterlife. Turned into gnarled trees, twisted in proportion to the injury they cause themselves, their branches have taken on the properties of limbs. If broken, a branch would bleed and feel like a broken limb. Meanwhile, harpies, the vicious flying hags of Greek mythology, fly into the trees and tear them apart with their talons. Without bodies, the souls have lost their ability to speak, except when one of their branches is broken and they're bleeding. The tree whose limb Dante broke cries out in pain and begins complaining about its dismal fate. Realizing the sinner is Italian, Dante questions him, and the soul identifies itself as Peter della Vigna, a figure from real history. He explains that in life, he had been the High Chancellor to the German Emperor Frederick II. After rivals falsely accused him, Peter was disgraced and imprisoned. Having fallen from such a high position, and with no way to acquit himself, he fell into despair and killed himself in prison. He then explains how his soul descended and took on the form of one of the gnarled trees here. Dante and Virgil then see a mad chase occurring through the forest. A sinner, one of the profligate who squandered his inheritance, speeds through the forest while pursued by ravenous dogs. As the chase proceeds, the sinner and the dogs both break branches and crash into trees, causing cries of pain to ring out through the circle. Dante and Virgil reach the end of the forest and look out to see a desert of burning sand. Here, 3 types of sinners are punished: blasphemers, sodomites, and usurers. Crossing the desert, the poets see the blasphemers who despise God. They lie stretched on the boiling sand, reveling in their suffering, as they continue to yell screams of hatred against God. Another group is the sodomites, those guilty of sexual crimes. Exiled to march through the desert alone, their feet burn on the boiling sand. Meanwhile, black clouds rain fire down upon them. The usurers, loan sharks who made their money through high interest rates, sit in circles in the desert, looking at coin purses tied around their necks that they were obsessed with filling in life. As Dante and Virgil advance through the desert, Dante sees Bruno Latini, a Florentine poet who had a great influence on him. Writing sonnets on love and sensuality, Bruno explains that late in his career he became a sex criminal. Dante feels despair, seeing a mentor here who he had a great affection for in life. Bruno asks Dante about developments in Florence, and Dante explains the rise of the Guelphs, and them dividing between black and white. Reaching the end of the desert, the poets reach another cliff, one far steeper than those they descended before. Before the poets, a branch of the Styx hurtles down the cliff face, creating a massive waterfall and overwhelming the poets with its roaring sound. Looking over the edge, Virgil turns to Dante and takes the sash or cloth belt he has tied around his waist. Dante looks down to see the red sash hurtling over the edge. Dante peers down to see an ungodly creature, Charon, flying up to meet them as if summoned. In life, Charon was the soul of a tyrannical king, who was later killed by Heracles. In the afterlife, he's assumed a terrible form. Charon has the body of a scaled reptile, but with hairy arms like a man, and a tail like a scorpion. Meanwhile, he flies with wings that look like those of a bat. To complete this horror, he's retained the face of an honest man, and is able to speak like a human, producing an unsettling impression. Virgil speaks with Charon, negotiating with him, and similar to Nessus, Dante fears the creature will betray them. Climbing onto his back, the poets descend to the 8th circle. The poets disembark Charon and find themselves in the darkest circle they have been in. As they proceed, Virgil explains this is the circle of the Malebolge, or evil pits. Forced into black pits based on their sins, the specialized punishments here show the complexity of God's justice. The first pit, or bolgia, consists of the slavers of prostitutes, those who sold flesh for profit during life. Since man has a divine nature, selling the bodies of others is profane. As they were slave drivers in life, in death the sinners are driven in circles, tortured by archetypal demons, horned in pitch black and wielding lashes. Dante and Virgil see the next pit, dedicated to sycophants, liars who only spoke words of flattery during life. In death they're buried in excrement. The poets then see the simonists, clergy who sold religious offices for money. Here the sinners are placed upside down in crevices, which have searing fire shooting out of them. Meanwhile, as more simonists arrive in hell, they force the earlier sinners down further into the crevices. Dante sees a man in papal garb, facing down in one of the crevices. Calling out to him, the figure identifies himself as a ghost of Pope Nicholas III. Mistaking Dante for his replacement, he prophesies 2 other popes of Dante's time will join him in the same crevice, Boniface VIII and Clement V. The next bolgia includes fortune-tellers and diviners, those who try to predict the future. Their punishment is to walk backwards for eternity, their heads twisted backward completely around their necks. Among these souls, Dante sees the spirit of Tiresias, the prophet Odysseus consulted in Homer's poem. The next bolgia consists of scammers and grifters, those who deceived others for profit in life. In punishment, winged demons wielding grappling hooks send them hurtling down upon them, each swing cutting them and tearing their flesh into pieces. As the poets cross an infernal bridge, they look forward to see a company of demons. With twisted forms and visages, the poets see they take pleasure in the pain they're causing. Dante points out to Virgil that one of the demons has taken the flesh around his anus and formed it into the shape of a trumpet. Virgil tells Dante to hide behind a boulder while he goes forward to parley with the demons. Though they rush forward toward Virgil malevolently, they stop short of attacking him. Virgil negotiates with their leader, Malakota, who explains that the next bridge has been destroyed, a result of the earthquake caused by Christ when he descended into hell. Malakota provides a group of demons to escort the poets, though their malign nature upsets Dante. As they pass the grifters, the demons lose self-control and fly down to torture them. Seeing this, the poets use the opportunity to slip away. The demons see them fleeing and fly after them, but the poets escape by sliding down into the next bolgia. The pit of the hypocrites, they're forced to march in circles, wearing monks' habits that are beautifully gilded on the outside, but weighed down by lead on the inside. The hypocrites tread over Caiaphas, the high priest who sentenced Christ to death, who lies crucified on the ground of the Bolgia. Virgil marvels at this, as Caiaphas had not been there on his prior journey through hell. The poets climb out of the Bolgia, then look into the next one. In it, hordes of reptiles swarm over the bodies of thieves. Dante sees one of the reptiles take flight, flying through the air and puncturing the jugular of one of the thieves. He then bursts into flames before burning into a pile of ashes. Dante then looks on in wonder as the thief's body painfully reforms, so he can experience further torture. Another Bolgia consists of the false counselors. They're immersed in flames, the tongues of fire representing the harm their speech caused in life. Dante sees Odysseus here, a punishment for devising the scheme of the Trojan horse. The next Bolgia consists of the schismatics, those who cause discord on earth. Their punishment is to be driven in circles through the pit, while their bodies are hacked to pieces by a great demon wielding a sword. They drag their torn bodies about the pit till they reform, only to relive the same torture again at the hands of the demon. Dante sees Mohammed here, who he felt divided the universal religion. He sees his son-in-law Ali here, who similarly caused a schism amongst the Muslims. Mohammed has been cut upward, from his genitals to his chin, his internal organs hanging out as he's driven through the circle. Meanwhile, Ali's head has been cut in half, from his scalp to his chin. Dante sees a figure from his time here, Bertrand de Born, a knight who had served the King of England. Bertrand's head has been completely removed, the soul forced to carry it with him like a lantern. In one of the most surreal scenes in the comedy, the decapitated Bertrand speaks to Dante while holding his head. He explains how he drove kin against kin, starting a civil war in England called the Great Revolt. The last Bolgia consists of charlatans, like alchemists and counterfeiters. Trapped in a pit the demons drop their garbage into, they've developed skin diseases like leprosy. Unable to drink, eat, or sleep, Dante sees that some have gone mad. At the end of this circle, Dante and Virgil reach another cliff, which drops precipitously into the final circle of hell. Dante sees what appear to be towers, but are actually giants slumbering around. These are the Titans, the gods who preceded the Olympians. In mythology, they created a tyranny over their descendants, with Kronos, the father of Zeus, attempting to eat him and his other children. Escaping him and freeing his siblings, Zeus and the Olympians made war on the Titans, eventually defeating them and banishing them here, to Tartarus or Greater Hell. Among the giants here is Antaeus, who fought against and was beaten by Heracles during his 12 trials. Virgil steps forward to negotiate with him, and the Titan agrees to pick up the poets and deposit them in the 9th and final circle of hell. The lowest level of hell, Cocytus, coming from the Greek word for lamentation, takes the form of a frozen lake. Divided into 4 rings, this circle punishes the traitors, those who betrayed those who loved them. It's divided into regions named after 4 historical figures: Cain, Antenor, Ptolemy, and Judas. The sinners here are frozen in the lake, symbolizing their distance from warmth, God, and love. Meanwhile, a freezing wind assails their faces. The first ring, containing the biblical Cain, is for those who betrayed their kin, just as Cain murdered his brother Abel. The sinners' bodies here are totally frozen in ice, though their heads stick out above the ice and are able to bend down, allowing them to find some relief from the freezing gale. The next ring is named after Antenor, the Trojan who betrayed his city to the Greeks. In Homer, he's a counselor to Priam, who tells him to return Helen to Menelaus. Opposed to the war, he helps the Greeks open the gates to Agamemnon's army. In exchange, his house is spared during the sack of the city. In this ring are the souls who betrayed their countries. Though their heads are above the ice, they cannot bend their necks, giving them no relief from the gale. Dante accidentally kicks one of the souls here. then looks down to see who it is. It's a figure from his time, Bocca Abadi, a Florentine who betrayed the Guelphs to the Ghibellines, resulting in many of them being slaughtered in battle. Having lost friends due to him, Dante unleashes his wrath on the sinner, wailing on him and beating him savagely, before insulting and spitting on him. Again, Virgil praises Dante for his justice in despising the sinner. The poets proceed and see two more souls, the Italians Count Ugolino and Bishop Ruggieri. In life, Ugolino was a Ghibelline and Ruggieri a Guelph. Conspiring, they sought to betray both factions for their own benefit, but in the midst of their scheme, Ruggieri betrayed his accomplice. The bishop then arranged for Ugolino to be imprisoned in a tower. Trapped there with his 4 sons, tradition taught that as he starved, the count ate his sons to stay alive. In the afterlife, the two traitors are reunited, frozen beside each other in Antenora, with Ugolino, appropriately, eternally biting and gnawing on the neck of his former accomplice. Dante and Virgil then enter the ring of Ptolemaea, dedicated to those who betrayed ties of hospitality. In the Old Testament, Ptolemy invited his father-in-law and other guests to a banquet. While comfortable in dining, he ambushed them, having all of them slaughtered. Virgil explains that these sinners committed extremely grievous crimes. Their sins were so severe that on committing them, their souls were immediately sent to this circle. Meanwhile, their bodies back on earth became inhabited by demons until they died. The souls in Ptolemaea try to cry, but their tears freeze in their eye sockets, sealing them shut. They're denied the relief of crying and blinded. Finally, the poets have a vision of Satan, who lies at the base of hell at the center of the earth. All earthly rivers drain there, and the lake of Cocytus is formed by the tears of Satan himself. A frightening otherworldly being, Satan is frozen in the lake. He beats his bat-like wings, trying to escape, but this is the cause of his imprisonment, freezing the lake and being the source of the frozen gale. This final sphere of hell, named after Judas, is dedicated to those who betrayed their masters. Satan, who betrayed God, has 3 faces, an inversion of the Trinity. One is black, one red, and one yellow. And just as God is omniscient, all-powerful, and all-loving, Satan is the opposite, ignorant, impotent, and full of hate. Each mouth of Satan contains a sinner who's eternally ripped in his teeth. To the sides are Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Caesar, and in the center is Judas, who betrayed Christ. As we mentioned, Dante was a proud Caesarian, and viewed Rome as selected by Providence to unite the world. Caesar's assassins were traitors, committing a murder that would create a calamity for the Romans. Meanwhile, the most tortured soul in the cosmos is Judas, the apostle who betrayed Christ to the Sanhedrin for 30 pieces of silver, before trying to return the money and committing suicide. At last, having had a full vision of hell and Satan himself, the poets have completed their journey through the inferno. They climb down the hairy flank of Satan until they reach the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Not drinking from it, they follow the passage made by the river until they reach the surface. When Dante and Virgil emerge on the surface, they look up at the sky to see the firmament. The sight of the stars and a bright full moon are refreshing after their journey through hell. Seasonally, it's the beginning of spring, a good omen for the poets. They have arrived on the island of Purgatory, which in Dante's mythology is an actual location on earth. In the Christian view, Jerusalem was the world's navel, at the crossroads between Europe, Africa, and Asia. The extreme edges of the world were Spain to the west and India to the east, both locations visited by the apostles. Beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, the medievals believed there was nothing other than a vast ocean. Dante envisioned Purgatory as an island in that vastness, one line on the opposite side of the earth from Jerusalem. On that island was the Mount of Purgatory. Dante and Virgil are approached by Cato, a Roman contemporary of Caesar. Though a pagan consigned to limbo, he's been made the guardian of Purgatory. In some ways, Cato is a strange presence, as during his life, he was an enemy of Caesar. He led the faction that defied him in the First Civil War. before being defeated and sent into exile in North Africa, where he committed suicide. Despite his politics, he was lauded throughout Italian history as a model of civic virtue. Cato accuses the poets of being escaped fugitives from hell, but Virgil explains the divine mission that they're on. Cato sees their fellow Italians and explains that the passage they've emerged from has placed them partly up the mount of Purgatory. He explains that in order for them to ascend properly, they must first descend to the shore, to reascend in an act of humility. Descending to the water, Dante washes off the film of hell that's amassed on his face. Dante then sees an angel serving as a boatman, transporting purgatorial souls to the island. The spirits sing hymns, and unlike the inverted ones of the Inferno, these are joyous, showing how the souls know they will one day ascend to the earthly paradise. Virgil explains how the spirits of the dead, if they don't enter hell by the way the poets passed, gather at the mouth of the Tiber in Italy. From there they're transported to Purgatory. Purgatory is a place of suffering, but one fundamentally different from the Inferno. While in hell, the souls suffer vainly, their natures denying the possibility of redemption. In Purgatory, the souls gain merit through suffering, which is a vehicle to purify their fallen natures. Unlike hell, every hardship in Purgatory brings relief, liberating the soul from its fetters. Not only that, but its hardships are voluntarily chosen, the souls remaining on each terrace of the mountain until they felt sufficiently purged to move on to the next level. Dante greets one of the spirits who's come on the boat, a friend from his life, the musician Casella. Dante tries to embrace him, but his arms go through the spirit. Dante asks his friend to play music, which he starts to do joyfully, until Cato comes to berate them and send them on their journey. The poets turn to Purgatory, which is a great mountain. It's divided into tiers or terraces, flat plains that circle the mountain. As we mentioned, in Dante's philosophy, the soul is born with original fault or sin. This manifests in the 7 deadly sins, which also fetter the human being to earth. Beyond its spiritual meaning, the cultivation of the virtues represents a practice that should be a part of one's daily life. Ultimately, Purgatory is a training in love, compelling the soul to achieve increasingly perfect levels of it. The mountain's terraces are divided into 3 tiers, representing perverse, deficient, and excessive forms of love. The sun, representing God or divine illumination, is necessary for the souls to progress up the mountain. While it shines, the souls can advance, but when it sets, they can't move forward at all. Purgatory is often associated with the idea of waiting, and Virgil explains that many spirits must wait on the shore before they can begin their ascent up the mountain. Here are the souls of the excommunicated, those expelled from the church on earth, but who repented. Also here are the indolent, those who delayed the work for salvation, those who died violently without last rites, and the rulers whose work distracted them from religion. Having arrived in Purgatory, those expelled out of the church must wait 30 years for each year on earth they were excommunicated. A soul here, a former German ruler named Manfred, asks Dante to find his daughter Constance when he returns to earth, and asks her to pray for him. He explains that as the ruler of Sicily, he went to war with the Pope and was excommunicated. He explains that if prayed for, the time each soul must spend on a terrace is shortened. Due to the lateness of his repentance, Manfred must wait in anti-purgatory for 500 years. Dante and Virgil then meet the indolent, those who delayed the work for salvation. As they made God wait on earth, so he makes them wait here. The poets meet a Florentine named Belacqua, a figure Dante knew personally. Having waited a lifetime to turn to religious matters, he must wait the same duration here before he can enter purgatory. Virgil explains the difference between purgatory and hell to Dante. He explains that the ascent to purgatory becomes easier the higher one gets. In the beginning, one is heavy, weighed down by the weight of sin, but the more one is purified, the more weightless one becomes until the spirit can ascend. Some of the souls in anti-purgatory turn to Dante, and seeing he casts a shadow, are stunned that the poet is a living man. Recalling our earlier discussion of mysticism, this suggests Dante tried to tread this spiritual path in his lifetime. The poets then see those who died by violence and didn't receive last rites, an important ritual in Catholicism. Finally, they see the negligent rulers. Though they received the divine right of kings, these monarchs were distracted by governance and failed to cultivate themselves spiritually. While it may seem strange to modern readers that rulers are given an extra indulgence, it fits with Catholic theology. In the Middle Ages, rulers were responsible not only for their own souls, but those of their subjects as well. Thus, they're given an opportunity to do their spiritual work in Purgatory. In Dante, both hell and purgatory begin with gates, while heaven will have a spiritual ascent and lack them. Thus, in Dante's theology, the gates of purgatory are effectively the gates of heaven. Dante and Virgil meet an angel who stands guard at the gate, and Dante prostrates before him in humility. The angel, holding a fiery sword, then cuts 7 P's in Dante's forehead, referring to the Latin word peccatum, or sin. Dante will have 3 dreams as he ascends the mountain. His first dream will be of an eagle, who takes hold of him and flies him to a fiery heavenly sphere. Later he'll have a dream of a siren, like those that lured Greek sailors to crash on the rocks. She symbolizes the vanity of the material world, and how its temptations lead us astray. Finally, he'll dream of Leah and Rachel, the 2 wives of Jacob in the Old Testament. He dreams of Leah gathering flowers, while Rachel gazes in a mirror. This symbolizes the 2 sides of the spiritual life. First, the active life of deeds, and second, the life of contemplation and withdrawal. Dante and Virgil arrive on the first layer of the mountain, that of those perverse in love. The first terrace is dedicated to pride. On this level, souls are forced to crawl up the mountain, while immense boulders, in proportion to their arrogance, are placed on their backs. Representing worldliness, pride binds the soul to earth and the physical. Dante meets 3 Italians here, who portray the categories of pride, birth, talent, and power. As Dante ascends the tier, he encounters an angel. He beats his wings gently on Dante's face, removing one of the P's. As Dante proceeds, his P's will gradually be removed. Dante and Virgil arrive at the next terrace, or tier of purgatory, that of envy. Envy means the resentment of others' happiness, wishing ill on others, and malice. The souls here have their eyes sewn shut, representing how they use them to only see the bad traits of others in life. Blinded, they lean against each other for support, something they never did when they were alive. They use a cliff face as an anchor to orient themselves, while wearing haircloth to humble themselves further. Haircloth was made from goat hair and was worn by medieval peasants. It was extremely uncomfortable, causing endless scratching and injuring the skin, and was often worn as a form of penance. The souls here repeat the lines of Christ, who taught to love one's enemies. The poets enter the tier of wrath. They are assailed by a thick smoke, symbolizing how anger blinds the soul to reason. The souls singe themselves and wander in the darkness, learning the virtues of patience and meekness. One of the challenges of wrath, as Aristotle taught, is expressing it appropriately. Too little wrath makes one meek and abusable, while too much turns one into a tyrant. By achieving the golden mean, one can use anger properly, allowing the soul to express righteous anger, like Christ when he attacked the money changers in the temple. After leaving the tier of wrath, Dante and Virgil ascend to the layer of those with deficient love, which has a single terrace, sloth. In the Middle Ages, sloth actually took the form of acedia, which referred to spiritual sloth, not working diligently on one's salvation. Here, the souls who were idle in life are made to race around the terrace, none even stopping long enough to see that Dante is a living man. Dante attempts to speak to a pope here, Pope Adrian, but he rushes forward, uninterested in the poet. Virgil suggests Caesar as an example of diligence, who after being labeled a traitor, sped rapidly across the Rubicon to Rome. The poets ascend to the next layer, that of excessive love. The The souls here are close to virtue, but need to reduce their attachments to earthly goods to achieve perfect love. Here, the hoarders and wasters, too attached to material things, are made to lie motionless, bound hand and foot with their faces in the dust, seeing the true dust that makes up material existence. The poets meet Hugh Capet, the father of the Capetian kings of France. Referring to their creation of the anti-popes in Avignon, he condemns his descendants, who he says are only interested in avarice. As the poets proceed, they hear the sound of an earthquake, and Hugh Capet explains that this signals a soul has completed their work in Purgatory and gained access to the worldly paradise. The next terrace is dedicated to the intemperate, gluttons who overindulged in food, drink, and alcohol. Emaciated through fasting, they're forced to crawl in their weakened states, meanwhile resisting picking the fruits off of the trees that fill the terrace. Finally, the poets reach the last terrace, dedicated to lust. By this point, the souls have been greatly liberated and only retain an excessive love of the body. The souls here must pass through a purifying flame, which purges them of the last aspects of their fallen nature. Dante is reluctant to pass through the fire, but does so at Virgil's urging, who reminds him of Beatrice. As Dante passes through, he sees the earthly paradise, and just outside it, an angel exuding brilliant light. At the top of Purgatory lies a restoration of the Garden of Eden. The original had been located in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. After Adam's exile, the wilderness consumed the original site, but it returned at the top of Purgatory. The paradise itself resembles a great garden, beautiful like Elysium, but instilled with a higher principle. The sky above it is a vivid blue, while luscious fruits grow hanging in easy reach from its trees, and a river of crystal clear water winds through the greenery. As Dante enters the garden, his soul feels utterly pacified, able to leave the harsh world of the physical behind. It is here where Virgil, who represents reason, must hand him over to a new guide, Beatrice, who represents divine love and theology. Virgil is just as astonished as Dante to see the earthly paradise. Appropriately, he crowns and miters Dante, declaring that he's gained self-mastery and lordship over his soul. Consequently, he's free to follow his self-will, as his soul is now in conformity with the true, good, and beautiful. Dante approaches the Lethe, a river from Greek mythology. Those who drank from it were said to forget their memories. In Plato's teaching, it represented the forgetfulness that occurred between lives before a soul reincarnated. Dante immerses himself in the water, causing him to forget any remnants of shame or guilt from his prior life. He then proceeds to a second river, one Dante has invented himself. It is called the Eunoe, coming from the Greek words for good memory. Drinking from it affirms the memories of the good deeds and nature of the soul. In the garden, Dante has a political vision. He sees a chariot representing the church covered in feathers, representing its corruption by wealth. A beast representing Satan tears at the chariot before the chariot itself turns into a monster. The monster then grows 7 heads, representing the church's corruption by the 7 deadly sins. Meanwhile, a prostitute representing the papacy rides on the monster's back before the beast devours them. Here we again see Dante's authority, showing that as a poet, he's history's final moral arbiter. In paradise, Dante's regained the pre-fallen state of man, Adam possessed in the garden. Only from this point, the promise of Christ in the Bible becomes possible, and the soul is able to enter his kingdom. Dante sees a vision of Jacob's ladder, a symbol of man's power to develop an angelic nature. Dante then has another vision. Overwhelmed by a resplendent light, he sees a golden candelabra, a rainbow, and a group of elders representing the authors of the Old Testament. He sees 4 animals representing the 4 Gospels, and a triumphant chariot drawn by a griffin that represents Christ. The griffin's nature, part eagle and part lion, represents the dual nature of Christ, human and divine. Dante sees the four cardinal virtues, temperance, justice, prudence, and fortitude, and the three theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, taking the forms of dazzling colors. He compares this vision to the disciples seeing Christ's transfiguration on the mountain in the Gospels. A throng of angels appears above paradise, and out of them descends Beatrice. Seeing his love, Dante is overcome with tears. He turns to Virgil to express his emotions, who gives the poet a final embrace before returning to Elysium. With Virgil gone, Dante feels grief, but as Beatrice arrives, she admonishes him. She praises Virgil as the light of reason, but explains reason's limits and the need for theology. Beatrice stands in front of Dante and raises his head to have him look directly in her eyes. United with the lifelong object of his devotion, their union represents the coming together of the archetypes of masculine and feminine. While gazing in her eyes, which are resplendent like the sun, Dante has his first beatific vision, filling him with joy and showing him the divine nature of reality. Finally, we enter the last book of the Comedy, the Paradiso, exploring Dante's ascent through heaven. With his guide, Dante and Beatrice take flight, literally rising through the sky in the astral plane. Reaching the speed of light, they enter the spheres of the planets, their ultimate target being the eternal rose of the Empyrean. As they rise for the first time, Dante hears the music of the spheres. This was a teaching of Plato, that the heavenly bodies, if approached, literally emitted notes of divine harmony. The music is compared with strings, suggesting these are some of the most expressive instruments, able to express the subtleties of human emotion. As Dante and Beatrice approach the sphere of the moon, we learn a principle of the Dantean heaven. While on earth there is hierarchy and inequality, they function differently in heaven. Though the souls here are in a hierarchy, simultaneously they all share the same resplendence of heaven equally. The souls are filled with bliss and joy, their spirits saturated with the overwhelming love of God. As we said, Dante was a creationist who believed man was created by God. Meanwhile, he viewed astronomy according to the Ptolemaic model. Ptolemy, different from the figure we described in Ptolemaea, was an ancient Greek astronomer from Egypt, famous for his observations of the astral world. Called the Wandering Stars, he identified 9 planets, including the sun and moon, that move throughout the sky. Meanwhile, in the distance were the fixed stars, in some traditions believed to be holes in the firmaments through which the light of heaven leaked through. Ptolemy's cosmos placed Earth at the center, providing evidence for creationism. Inspired by him, Dante's heaven consists of 9 concentric rings, paralleling the circles of hell. These rings, called spheres, have several mythological origins. In Christianity, its theologians sometimes sought to understand the natures of angels. Saint Dionysius, in particular, concluded there were 9 orders of angels, which corresponds with Dante's spheres. Meanwhile, the planets, believed by the ancients to be gods themselves, speeding across the sky, allowed Dante to integrate the pagan traditions into his Christian work. Across the sky will be Luna, Mercury, Venus, Sol, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the Roman gods. Meanwhile, if viewed from the Greek tradition, their equivalents would be Selene, Hermes, Aphrodite, Apollo, Ares, Zeus, and Kronos. Kronos is a strange inclusion for the Greeks. However, as Saturn, he had a positive nature when portrayed in the Roman religion. The source of Dante's heaven is the prima mobile, or first mover, an idea described by Aristotle. In order for creation to be, Aristotle concluded that there was an origin, a figure or being that lied outside of the universe. Dante is filled with joy, not only to be united with his love, but to be her companion as they proceed through the astral plane. Dante and Beatrice arrive in the first sphere, that of the moon. The souls here achieved high levels of holiness, but their religious vows were inconstant. They took vows to join religious orders, or promised to go on pilgrimages, then did not fulfill them. In Christianity, Christ counseled against the taking of oaths, in order to avoid hypocrisy. But the Church developed religious orders for those most devoted to the faith. Most in the circle were contemplatives, or monks who later returned to the world. Dante sees an historical figure here, Empress Constance, who was ordained as a nun, but was later compelled to marry due to politics. Dante and Beatrice next ascend to the second sphere, that of Mercury, devoted to those who sought the good in life for the purpose of honor. Associated with the principle of power, here Dante and Beatrice encounter the soul of Justinian, one of the Byzantine emperors. In the period before the rise of Islam, Justinian partially restored the old Roman Empire. A Christian, he and his general Belisarius reconquered North Africa from the Vandals and Italy from the Goths. Dante and Beatrice next arrive in the sphere of Venus, the third heaven. Appropriately, it's the sphere of the lovers, those who were able to refine the carnal desires they had in life to a higher purpose. Like mystics, they viewed worldly love as an analogy for their love of God. They recall mystics like Teresa of Avila or Rumi, who felt the summit of the spiritual life was a state of union or divine marriage between the soul and God. Dante meets a monarch here, Charles of Anjou, a king of Naples in southern Italy. Dante met Charles personally in Florence, and the monarch had planned to become Dante's patron, though he died prematurely before he could do so. Dante shows his affection for Charles, and the king tells Dante an allegory of a silkworm emerging from its cocoon to describe the process a soul goes through as it ascends through heaven. Dante and Beatrice rise to the fourth heaven, or the sphere of the sun, and are immediately approached by 12 luminous souls, who circle around them in a dance. The souls are so bright that Dante compares looking at them to staring at the sun. Like the souls of other spheres, their brilliance reflects the intensity of love that burns within them. This is the sphere of the wise, the souls most devoted to wisdom in life, yet they're drawn to the form of it in the afterlife. Dante sees theologians, philosophers, and doctors of the church here. As the spirits raise their voices in a euphonic greeting, their leader, Thomas Aquinas, comes forward to speak to Dante. He explains how Providence sent St. Francis, a model of humility, and St. Dominic, a model of discipline, as examples for Christendom. He praises their orders of monks, the Franciscans and Dominicans, but laments how his order, the Dominicans, have fallen to corruption. Thomas Aquinas praises St. Francis, who was born a nobleman but decided to renounce his wealth and embrace a monastic life, imitating Christ, who went into the wilderness. As Thomas Aquinas speaks, he hears Dante's thoughts and is able to respond to each question he asks. Dante is in awe of this and realizes that those in this sphere share God's omniscience or knowledge of everything. Dante is next visited by Solomon, the son of David, and the famous wise king of Israel from the Old Testament. Solomon explains the idea of judgment and how in the future there will be a resurrection of the dead. He predicts a time when heaven and earth will come together, and on that day the dead will be reunited with their bodies. Meanwhile, those in Elysium will gain access to the earthly paradise. Dante and Beatrice ascend to the fifth sphere of heaven, that of Mars, dedicated to warriors. Dante compares the brightness here to that of light, reflecting through a sapphire. While here, Dante meets with the spirit of his great-grandfather, who participated in the First Crusade. As we explored in another video, in the 11th century, the Pope rallied Europe to the cause of holy war. Promising redemption for those who gave their lives in the cause, Dante's ancestor explains how those martyred in the effort to take Jerusalem find themselves here. Dante has a vision of Christ on the cross, recalling a comparison we made in another video. In it, we compared Christ to Alexander the Great, saying that while Alexander was a conqueror in the physical, Christ represents a different, spiritual kind of conqueror, one who transcends the physical. Beatrice and Dante then ascend to the sixth heaven, the sphere of Jupiter. This sphere contains the form of justice, which organizes reality. Those who value justice on earth, or who possessed it in their soul, are drawn here in the afterlife. Dante sees a vision of an eagle, a symbol of empire, and a vision of a lily, a symbol of France and political justice. In this sphere, Dante sees Charlemagne and Roland. Charlemagne was the grandfather of Europe, having unified France and Germany under his reign as king of the Franks. Though illiterate, he valued learning and created the Order of Paladins to maintain justice in his kingdom. Creating one of the world's universal empires, he defeated the Lombards in Italy before forming a union with the papacy. In 800, the Pope crowned Charlemagne emperor, the first in the West since the 1450 fall of the Western Roman Empire. When Charlemagne went on crusade against the Moors in Spain, he ventured there with his nephew Roland. Roland was a paladin or knight, and in medieval romances was the example of chivalry. During the campaign in Spain, Roland was behind the main army, escorting the baggage train. Ambushed by Moors, he was killed, and his last action was to blow his horn, alerting Charlemagne. This caused the horn to become a powerful symbol in Christendom. Dante sees King David from the Bible, famous for being a wise lawgiver, and Constantine, who in 300 moved the imperial capital east from Rome to Constantinople. He was also the first Roman emperor to convert to Christian. Dante is astonished to see Trajan here, a pre-Christian Roman emperor. Dante points out there is a pagan here, and turns to Beatrice, astounded. A humble figure who rose from slave to emperor, Trajan was of Italic origin, and like Caesar, was celebrated by Italian patriots. In the Middle Ages, a popular tradition emerged around him, saying that he was a secret convert to Christianity. Beatrice explains that he experienced a unique act of grace, and because of this was admitted into paradise. Dante and Beatrice enter the seventh heaven, that of Saturn. This sphere is dedicated to the contemplatives, those most advanced in the inner life, retiring from the world and living in the wilderness. Those here include the great mystics. This sphere includes the ecstatics, those in life who achieve the state of self-loss and the union of the soul with God. Dante associates this sphere with the lion, the animal symbolizing how contemplation represents the summit of human excellence. Dante and Beatrice ascend to the eighth sphere, that of the fixed stars. While here, they look down on earth and see it from God's perspective. They see they're about halfway between Spain and Jerusalem, looking down at Italy and showing its centrality in history. From this perspective, they see God as a geometer who measures the spheres. Dante sees the Archangel Gabriel, John the Baptist, and the apostles here. Dante meets Adam here, the first man created by God, the ancestor of all humanity. He tells Dante about his life in the garden, how he erred, and how God exiled him into the wilderness. St. Peter visits Dante, and in a rage expresses his anger at the corruption of the church. He then explains miracles to Dante, affirming they were done by Christ to show the truth of his teaching. Dante proceeds to have a number of visions. He has a vision of destiny, showing how man lives under both free will and destiny at the same time. Dante has a vision of time, seeing its beginning, span, and end as one, the three combining in eternity in the mind of God. He has a vision of parthenogenesis, or virgin birth, seeing it as an allegory for the birth of the universe. Dante sees a vision of his return to Florence, visiting the same baptismal font from when he was born, and there taking a laurel crown and placing it on his head. Dante has a vision of Christ's conquest of death, his life constituting not only a moral revolution, but a demonstration that man can attain immortality. Dante's sight is so overcome by brightness that he goes blind. He compares the brilliance here to that of light shining through a topaz. Aiding him, Beatrice and St. John, the apostle Christ loved, help him regain his sight. Finally, Dante and Beatrice ascend to the heights of paradise, the fiery sphere of the Empyrean. Here, Dante is in union with his lover, the couple embodying the archetypal marriage and perfect union of masculine and feminine. Gazing up, they see God as a singular point, all-knowing, all-loving, and omnipotent. Around him revolves a bright, sempiternal rose, consisting of the 9 spheres. Dante sees how the blessed spirits revolve around him in a circle, exuding brilliant light. Bathed in love, the souls both retain their individuality and lose it in a state of union with God. Dante is often depicted with a crown of laurel, a plant native to Greece and Italy. We discussed this in another video, explaining its origins in the ancient kings of Greece and then the disciples of Apollo. The laurel crown is associated with excellence, achieving greatness politically or artistically. For Dante, it represents first his excellence as a poet, having completed one of history's great works, and second as a mystic, having seen the full breadth of the human experience and lived the spiritual life to its summit. Like the great heroes of the past, Dante has descended and returned from the underworld. A moral philosopher, in the comedy, he tries to discern God's justice and man's purpose in the universe. A supreme poet, he marries the Christian and Roman mythologies. A humanist, he explores the topics of suffering, guilt, and loss, and offers faith and wisdom as antidotes. A spiritual psychologist, Dante is one of the most humane and aesthetic figures in history. In the comedy, he presents a bold vision of history, filled with order and meaning, shows man as divine and entitled to inherent dignity, and elevates the Christian narrative, showing how it constitutes a path to immortality. While justice, wisdom, and beauty reign in heaven, as an artist, Dante shows that beauty is the highest principle. Thus, the full vision of the comedy results in the soul's union with beauty itself.